at the Canadian Beef Industry Conference. I'm Piper Whalen with Alberta Beef Producers, and today I'm joined by Annessa Good, Business Advisor with FCC. Thank you for joining us today, Annessa.
Thank you so much, Piper.
So what do you do with FCC?
So in the advisory services role, excited to announce that we are now rolled out nationally, the business advisors. And what we do is we work in the pre-transition spot. So regardless if you are an FCC customer or not, you can contact your local FCC office. It is our mandate to work with Canadian farm families and help them start their transition journey.
Wonderful. Great to hear that that's now available nationally.
Mm-hmm.
So you were speaking at the conference today. What did we miss?
Yeah, no, it was a great opportunity today to be in front of the Canadian cattle industry. And, definitely what we talked about was, what are some aspects to consider in your transition plan? We talked about some considerations of how your business structure can help support you meet your day-to-day objectives and really the family dynamics and how that plays into that. And then we also spent some time on compensation for the junior and senior generation.
Wonderful. So much good information to consider. So as part of your presentation, you spoke about the aspects of a full transition plan, and you had 5 pillars. Would you be able to take us through them?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely, giving a shout out to my Ontario colleague, Andrea DeGroot. I really like how she kind of laid out these pillars, and that's what we talked about today. So often when I'm working with farm families, they say, okay, Annessa, I need a plan, right? Like we need to create this transition plan. And the first thing I like to do is slow down and say, okay, whoa, like first let's talk about what needs to be considered in the plan. So first off, I think first and foremost is the business plan. This is not under the idea of it's a new project or we're applying for a loan. It's really starting to understand how the business plan, identifying current and future goals for the business and the family. I always say math helps remove emotion, right, Piper? We know how emotional transition planning can be. So what is financially feasible for your family and operation? And then really figuring out proactively those pieces we talked about today of retirement income for the senior generation, and also how the estate plan affects the business viability. Second pillar, management plan. This is really an evolution of transition planning that we are looking at this beyond simply the transfer of assets, right? So I always say, how are we setting the successors up for success? So identifying roles and responsibilities and really transitioning that management and that tacit knowledge, right? That's the hardest part. But really empowering junior generations, in FCC language, to become future CEOs of their business.
Nice.
Yeah. The third pillar, we definitely talked about and I spent some time on is compensation. Retirement income now and in the future for the senior generation and, especially compensation for the junior generation. We talked about if you have multiple siblings coming home to work together, this one is a very important topic to address. And then, personal expenditures. This is a big one too.
Right.
The fourth pillar, tax management. So as we all know in agriculture, probably one of the most important pillars to be as efficient and effective as we can be. Do you have the right people on your technical team to support you through the tax strategies and picking the best plan for your family? But we also spent some time and talked about and said, in that proactive planning with our trusted advisors, the best efficient tax plan, making sure does it also match our family's goals and objectives. So if we need to adjust the plan a little bit and potentially pay a little bit more tax, but it hits all those goals and objectives, is that the best choice, right? So really working with your advisors of what they advise. And the last pillar, probably the most important pillar and the most difficult, I would say, is execution, right? Execution and actual implementation. So we're all really good about talking about these things, but actually creating working instructions to action the plan for the 4 previous pillars. And again, what we spent some time on and I'm really passionate about is who's going to lead those different pillars, right? Obviously, if there is different people, we all have to be working together and communicating because they're dependent on each other. But this doesn't all have to fall on one person. It can't. We need our technical advisors as well as family. And lastly, talking about the time frame for each stage of execution. I think that's really important.
Wonderful. This is all excellent information to consider. So how often should families have transition plan meetings?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think I might scale it back a little bit and just talk about, meetings and communication to start. I think it's a very counterintuitive, right? Like, we're family, we talk all the time. If we're in an intergenerational operation, like, we're having lunch over at mom and dad's or whatever. But I think the key point there is intentional communication. So, we're all really good at day-to-day communication. I still think we can be more clarity about that, which would help with a lot of the frustration or confusion between family members, with weekly meetings on kind of day-to-day operational tasks. If you don't like the word meeting, like some people just kind of have their backup about meeting, pick a different word. We're going to hang out and talk about these intentional things. I think kind of monthly or quarterly, however your family wants to look at it that way, I think that's a great opportunity for us to do more of that, like business planning, projecting, forecasting, assessing where we're currently at, where we want to go. But for the transition that you're talking about, I think that's why I wanted to start with those other ones, because then it makes the transition meeting much more impactful, I believe, is, twice a year or once a year, really setting the stage to have an intentional meeting, to sit down with the family and talk about, okay, we're going to talk about compensation. We're going to talk about transfer. If you guys are at that stage of assets, certainly transfer of management, roles and responsibilities, really setting out those expectations, because I think that's the biggest thing is we don't clearly communicate our expectations on both sides.
Absolutely. And you see that come up so often within agricultural families and our businesses. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's really an opportunity, kind of like what we talked about today in the presentation. Some other presentations talked on it, so it was a great build on to this presentation that I always encourage families to start that meeting with everyone goes around the table and shares the best thing that happened that year, like what went right, because I think that then sets the stage for us to certainly like it was talked about, it kind of changes the brains and our chemicals, and we all chemicals in our brain, there we go, we all show up a little differently. And I think again, it's very kind of feels awkward for family, but to have an intentional meeting and stay on track, because that's why we kind of quit having meetings, right? Is they last hours, or we get frustrated, or somebody fights and walks out or whatever. Really big promoter for these more formal meetings of having an agenda, and we know everybody brings one topic they want to talk about, so we can kind of try to stay on track and, going back to our good old 4-H days and things like that.
Wonderful. So where can producers find more tools and advice on transition planning or any of these topics we discussed today?
Yeah, absolutely. There is, on FCC's website, so fcc.ca, under their knowledge umbrella, there's so much information available. FCC also has, podcasts. We have a YouTube channel that I think has really good little short videos on a lot of aspects of transition planning. We just completed a 9-step series for transition planning, so that's also on our YouTube channel. And I also encourage, there's so many other organizations and resources out there that it's finding the time, right? Like, we're all so busy. We're running in a million directions, specifically the cattle industry. Labor is such a time-consuming piece. But again, this is where I really go back and say, from the senior generation, if we don't take the time for this, are we setting the junior generation up for success? Will they have a viable business and or be able to handle the responsibilities and the management? And from the junior generation's perspective, if you're not being empowered with this and trying to understand and be able to assess what you can afford and what this plan looks like in your future, it's not really a risk management we can avoid.
Absolutely. So much good information to consider and so many resources available for us once we are able to bring our families together and work on this proactively, as you said.
Yeah, if we're proactive, it's not personal. When we wait to react to a situation, now it feels very personal.
So true. Thank you so much for joining us today, Annessa.
Thank you, Piper.